I appreciate the in-person audience and their echoing chorus, which makes me feel at home as a person in long-term recovery. Also want to say hello to our YouTube audience, those of you who are watching. Great to see you, and look forward to the day when we can return to on-campus attendance by our alumni and families. And I want to say hi also to those patients who are in other parts of our campus and watching on live stream. So great to have you also with us, and welcome aboard. The theme for today's message is one that is a lesser known subject matter in the spiritual category of virtues. And virtue is not exactly an extremely common term. It's not probably something I would say our general audience knows immediately. Probably those who are Roman Catholic might immediately think of the 7 cardinal virtues, which I think are prudence, fortitude, justice, courage, faith, hope, and love. That's 4 plus 3. But that does not exhaust the list of virtues in the Christian tradition, nor is the Christian tradition the only of the wisdom traditions that speaks about or indeed calls human beings to examine the ideas that are behind this sort of rarely used word virtue. And in fact, I was trying to research the particular virtue I want to attend to this morning was one that was called to my attention when I was in seminary many years ago, the virtue of constancy. And I spoke about that with a friend that I was just pointing to a week or two ago. But as I was looking into the virtue of constancy and trying to see to what extent it would span other traditions, which I knew it had to, I found a great Dharma component in the Buddhist tradition, which Buddhism attends very deeply to virtue in its own way. It doesn't necessarily use the same terminology. And with Buddhism, when you're studying it, you have problems of translation and language, which you have also in Christianity. But anyway, I think, let me get my note just to get the right word. I think it's patraya is the word for the Buddhist teaching that, where did I put it? Anyway, something like that. The idea of constancy, which also will express itself in any wisdom tradition worth its salt, is one of our readers who's going to read later. We were talking about it in passing, and we talked about the word steadfastness. And in Judaism, steadfastness is a characteristic that is permanently and always attributed to God, with a particular expression of the idea of love in chesed, which is God's faithful love. And human beings attempt to mirror the divine love, but do it imperfectly. So no, I'm not picking on any one person, but my guess is that that's a deep truth, that you have not been perfect in your practice of love. And you may even doubt whether, first of all, there is some higher power, or secondly, whether the higher power can be accredited with the idea of constancy. And many people really struggle with that, the idea that God is permanently and continuously loving and faithful and attendant to our deepest need is one that people struggle with for obvious reasons. So does that put us off the hook? Like we should not be worried about our own struggle with constancy and faithfulness? I would say definitely not. And I'm not wanting to get lost on the struggle of whether and how and can one believe in a God who allows terrible things to happen in a world that we struggle with. But that's a whole separate talk for another day. The reason I want to narrow the focus is that I do think in my own journey of seeking to move out of addictive life and out of the family of origin formation experience that led to me being a daily consuming teenager into my young adult years, I will speak for myself first. I don't think I understood how to do relationship very well. And I mean that not only in the intimate partner relationship, but as a sibling, as a child, as a friend, as a coworker, as a parent, as a pastor, in every area of my life as I have continued through my sobriety, I have been reminded that my early formation didn't set me up to be relationally super competent. I lacked maturity and competence in the navigation of relationship. And I would respectfully suggest that if you're sitting here in the Caron auditorium with a wristband on, and you're a patient, that you may also suffer from some degree of relational impairment. And that it can be tremendously illuminating to look at your addictive phenomenon in that way. In fact, there was a scholar named Philip Flores, I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, but who wrote a text now at least 20 years ago that describes addiction through the lens of attachment disorder. And what he is suggesting as a psychologist is that those of us who manifest use disorders or addictive presentations are relationally compromised. We have a problem with attachment. And so we attach to substance or process addiction or whatever, and we use that as a coping mechanism because of the instability and lack of success in our human attachments. And I think, personally, at least for me, that's spot on. And I yearn for relational competence. That's if anybody wants a Jack treatment goal, there it is. Jack yearns for relational competence. And here's one of the things that the study of the virtues, and specifically the study of the virtue that the Christians call constancy, in which the Buddhists have this apatria name for, like study of virtue in general, leads to these ideas that things like courage and fortitude and prudence and there's all kinds of things that would be nice to do skillfully. But the thing that's so interesting to me about constancy, and one of the writers that writes about it that really infected me with this idea many years ago in my studies, was that constancy can be measured in an event, an action, or even like a singular concept. It has to be measured over time. Constancy is a thing that's demonstrated in the story of how we live. And so, if I said, does my boss demonstrate constancy to me? I can't say, well, last week when I called him, he called me right back. That's accountability, right? That's like one of those things that that's an instance of that. The question is more about pattern and history. And in particular, here's one of the litmus tests for constancy is, in a relationship with someone, I'll pick my boss, because I have a great relationship with my boss. And I don't know why, but he stumbled in my brain. So here he is, now he's in view. And the question to ask, his name is David, is if I imagine myself walking down an alley with David, and I'm just a half a pace in front of him, so he's out of my peripheral vision, and I suddenly see people coming at me who I interpret as dangerous, and I fear for my life because I'm afraid I'm going to be mugged or whatever. Do I doubt whether David is still there? And if David has manifested as a person of constancy in my life, I'm pretty sure he is there. Or he's saying to me in my ear, we need to get the bleep out of here, right? But that he won't abandon me. No person left behind. This military principle is because in military practice, this idea of constancy is a part of what creates the esprit de corps and the incredible dynamics of team formation. It's partly this idea that I'm. The other way I talked about it with the first responders this week was a word that I learned about when I was in seminary, because Lech Walesa was the Solidarity guy, was the president of Poland for a brief period of time. I went back and did some research on that. In 1989 to 1995, he was president of Poland. That was right when I was getting sober and then went to seminary. And so when I was learning about God's constancy, I was also mirroring that with this thought of how this movement in Poland of a labor union that democratized that nation at that period of time, imperfectly, but that's another word you can use for solidarity. Faithfulness, steadfastness, constancy, solidarity, all are, I think, in some ways synonymous. And I like the litmus test. Are you a person who other people could rely on in the dark alley moment? Because if you think about addiction, one of the things that we often do is we either are absent, we don't show up when we're supposed to be there, or we were there but then we're not there because we're seemingly not terribly present. We're stoned or nodding out or, really impaired in our functioning. And so that's a pseudo-absence. And this show-up quality is one of the things that is a really important telltale of solidarity and constancy in our relational life. And so the hope and vision I would love to put in front of you for a second, if you're a patient or if you're a person out there on our YouTube audience or whatever, is can you imagine what it would be like to be able to look back on the recent period of your life, whether it's the last 28 days or the last 3 months or the last 6 months or the last 10 months or the last year or 2 years or whatever, and think, every day when I woke up, I made a decision to go where I was supposed to be, do what I was supposed to do, and if I couldn't do that, to try and take accountability. Not George in the first responders movement, not a patient, but one of our staff members said, this will affect your life if you make a decision to start practicing constancy. What you will stop doing is making combined tentative commitments. Oh, maybe I'll go with you tomorrow, unless I get a better offer. And then I get a better offer, and so I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be there. And then this better offer turns out, oh, no, now that somebody else has got like front row, backstage pass, tickets to blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, I'm not even going to do that, because now I'm going to go here. That is tremendously inconstant behavior, and it will cost you in the long run in terms of how you're viewed as a member of any kind of community. And so the fruit of the practice of constancy is not only greater personal self-regard, but it's greater belonging and acceptance in communities of relationship. You will like yourself more, and other people will be happier to be in partnership with you in whatever form that partnership may present itself. So it's really a valuable commodity, and you have control about it. You actually do, especially now that you're here, because guess what? You're no longer like stoned and high, maybe on a taper or whatever, but now that you have the capacity to string together continuous abstinence one day at a time, if you want to experience the incredible joys of a recovering sober life, I would urge you to begin with this simple idea that one of my former supervisors here used to express as, suit up, show up. Be where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, and do the next right thing. That was his basic idea of the practice of a recovery spiritual life. Was suit up, show up, be where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, and do the thing that you were supposed to do. Deliver on your basic sort of expectations as they're imposed upon you by the commitments and contracts in which you are a part of. So if you're a husband to a husband or a wife, like, suit up and show up. If you're a parent to a child, suit up and show up. Be where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there. Go to the game, get the gift, make the phone call, do the text, and do it today. Don't promise that you're going to do it next month or next year, because sadly what's happened for most of us as addicts in early recovery is that our credibility is shot. And that, in fact, when we say things like, I'm sorry, or I won't do it again, we have trained our audience to believe that we are about to do it again. So instead of promising and stating your intention and proclaiming your new virtuous perspective on life, incarnating practice starts to change your story. And as you change your story, people will experience that. They will experience you as a person who one day, when the dark alley moment comes up, whatever that is, it might be a COVID crisis, it might be a financial crisis, it might be a medical crisis, it might be an employment crisis, whatever. They don't have to wonder, oh no, do you have my back? Are you on my flank? Are you still here? Because you are a person suddenly who suits up and shows up, who is where he's supposed to be when he or she is supposed to be there, and you do what you say you're supposed to do. And it sounds like bizarrely simple, which it actually is, And isn't that interesting that from starting from a lofty notion of virtue, we get down to this concrete notion of inhabiting the day-to-day moment with accountability and manifesting a kind of authentic presence. Will you do it perfectly? I assure you, you will not. I guarantee you that there will be a day when you have to realize that you said you were going to do something and you missed it on your calendar, or something comes up or whatever. But then there are other ways to show virtue in terms of how you dance with that. You know, how you don't lie on top of a fail, and how you offer to make amends. And yet this prize, which I said I wanted, remember I said what my goal was relational competence. And what I mean by that is that I would be able to love and be loved. And if you think about that in an inverse way, what I'm saying is, when I struggled with relational competence, I was not really able to love and be loved. So that's a pretty harsh indictment if you can hear it and feel it. Our patients, when they land here, have not been able to love and be loved well. And they are frequently hurting terribly, full of shame, angry, bitter, defensive. Don't raise your hands. And somehow somebody has persuaded them that they should stop using substances, which turns out to be a great idea. It's both everything and not everything. In other words, you're not going to be able to inhabit a relationally competent life without ceasing the substances, because they are an unhealthy attachment. But once you stop that unhealthy attachment, I was talking to one of our patients before the group, and I'm like, you might experience real discomfort. Like, you can be really uncomfortable in early sobriety. And they come up with this great term, post-acute withdrawal. But to me, it's like, I used to be a jerk that was stoned. Now I am not stoned, and I find out, I'm just a jerk. And so I'm like, how do I cope with this? And somebody says, well, stop being a jerk. And I'm like, that's a good idea. So, how do I not be a jerk? Suit up, show up, be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there, and do the next right thing. So it's a slow, incremental path. And I'm like, you don't have a pill? There's not a surgery? There's not a magic wand? Like, no, just stop being a jerk and stop drinking, and stay stopped on your drinking, and watch what happens. And that's the promise, is that if you inhabit and manifest constancy one day at a time, make amends when you fall short. All of these things that I could tell you about that have happened in my life could happen also in yours.